to be talking about gynecological health, fertility, and the vaginal microbiome tonight. We have the amazing Kimberly Shepard, one of the most exciting acupuncturists and fertility specialists that I have met in a long time. I think we connected first, is it 2 years now? Maybe 2 years ago?
Something like that.
On a similar virtual panel, and then we connected in person as well, and I was just blown away by your knowledge of gynecological health, fertility, holistic wellness, and your personal experience as well. So I'm so happy that we get to share your knowledge and insights with the community today. So for today's evening, we are going to go through a short introduction to Kimberly Life and Lemons, her incredible clinic, as well as to Daye and the work that we're doing and how we're partnering with Life and Lemons on vaginal microbiome screening. If you have any questions at any point, please do feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, pop a question in the chat, whatever works best. Then we'll go into a question section. So I have some questions that I prepared for Kim today, and afterwards we'll save some time for a Q&A. So if that sounds good, Kim, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Introduce yourself
Thank you
and Life
firstly
and Lemons.
thank you for having me firstly, and thank you everyone for joining this evening. So I'm Kimberly. I am clinic director and lead acupuncturist at Life and Lemons Clinic. This is a specialist women's health and fertility clinic in Sheffield. We are passionate not just about treating fertility, but about empowering women with better understanding their bodies as well. So trying to plug the gaps of knowledge where perhaps we haven't been informed in the past, as there's so much lurking underneath. And really what we're trying to do is empower you with knowledge to better understand those things as well. So I'm, as I said, an acupuncturist, and I work with a team of other practitioners as well, and we feed into each other's treatment plans to make sure that all our patients have a very holistic and integrated approach to treatment. It's never just one thing, it's always lots of things to help you on the next steps in your fertility journey or your hormonal health as well.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your personal story and what inspired you to enter the world of gynecological health?
So I started on this path to acupuncture and specializing in women's health because at the age of 19, I was diagnosed with, well, they didn't diagnose it at the time. I think that was part of the problem. I had chronic bladder pain and bladder dysfunction, and I was passed from pillar to post in the Western medical system. They had absolutely no idea what was going on. I had surgery. I had ongoing medications that caused all sorts of other problems. I was seeing multiple specialists. And at the end, they said, at the end of this kind of 2-year process of being in chronic and debilitating pain, they said that there was nothing else that they could do for me. And the next thing, the only option they had at that particular point was to fit me with a bladder bag, essentially. And at the age of 19, 20, it certainly wasn't something that I was looking to do. I was very determined, very headstrong around trying to find an alternative in overcoming that particular obstacle. As I said, that wasn't an option for me at that time. So that's when I started to look at alternative mechanisms. My mum's a nutritional therapist, so I already had that as a background. And then I was introduced to acupuncture by a friend, and it was the acupuncture in combination with the nutritional therapy and talk therapy that actually transformed everything for me within a 9-month period. And that sounds like a really long time, but given that I was in this chronic pain for 2 years and completely debilitating pain, even small steps in the right direction were really significant for me. And also, obviously, because I was working on my health on a deep cellular level from a multimodality perspective, I was feeling so much better as a whole as well. And that's when I started to see that things changed completely. And now I'm here today, and I have no bladder problems. I have no bladder bag. It's something that is a distant memory for me, luckily. And that's when I started to explore other ways that I could help women that had this chronic pelvic pain or chronic pain in general, and help them better identify the root cause and mechanisms behind it. Because to me, it wasn't sufficient enough to be able to just simply be given a medication or have a specific surgery, because it just didn't work for me in that instance. And I think in women's health in particular, and I know Valentina would agree with me in this respect, that there is so much that's still left unsaid within that, in women's health and that realm, that there's still so much research that needs to be done, and light that needs to be shone on certain areas, for us to start gaining a better understanding around our bodies specifically. So that's how I got into it. That's what led me and my passion to explore supporting other women in this way, just to help them get out of that chronic, unexplained situation like I was historically in as well.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. I think it's really inspiring to see this new generation of entrepreneurs that are really, taking charge and taking their personal stories of hardship and being misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and turning them into really positive experiences for, the next generation to come and for many people. My story is personal, so similar to you, I was driven to do something different in the space of gynecological health as a result of my own struggles. So I'm part of the cohort of women that are starting their periods younger and younger. I was 9 when I had my first period, which was young at the time, but now is actually the average age that people start their menstrual cycle in the UK. 9 is the average age. And a year after my first painful period, I immediately got placed on hormonal contraception in order to manage my pain. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with hormonal contraception. It can be a really powerful tool for us. There are a lot of side benefits to hormonal contraception as well as side effects, but it shouldn't be our first line of defense when it comes to period pain. Unfortunately, it still is to this day. In my case, as a result of being exposed to synthetic hormones at such a young age, I developed ovarian disease, which I still struggle with to this day. Had to miss a whole year from school due to just debilitating abdominal pain. And I got tested for so many different things, UTIs, E. coli infections, IBS, kidney disease, before someone gave me an intravaginal exam and discovered that I had started growing ovarian cysts, the size of oranges, that were pressing against my ovaries, creating all of this pain and also restricting the blood supply to my ovaries. So one of my ovaries had actually started disintegrating within my body. And I just had so many misdiagnoses. One of the doctors that I was working with told me that this is for sure an ectopic pregnancy, even though I was so young, I hadn't been sexually active yet. And I kept saying, like, how could this be an ectopic pregnancy when I haven't been sexually active yet? And I was just completely ignored and gaslit, which unfortunately is still the experience that many of us have to this day. And initially I thought that my experiences were just a result of bad luck, and that I was just uniquely unfortunate. But then through conversations with my friends and my peers, I realized it's actually the norm in gynecological health. And then I went on this really deep dive in the gender health gap, and I realized, women weren't allowed to participate in clinical trials up until 1993, because until then, the predominant view was a very patriarchal one, where we thought that women as the vessels of life have to be protected at all costs, including protected from medical research and medical innovation. And as a result, we still don't have the infrastructure that is necessary to recruit female participants in clinical trials at the same rate as we do male participants. So what's happening now is that for medications that are specifically designed for the female body, we still use male patients to test them. So one example is the female Viagra. In the safety tests for the female Viagra, they used 92% male patients because it was so hard to recruit female patients. Another key example of the gender gap in healthcare is the gender gap in diagnostics. So we know that across 700 diseases, women get diagnosed significantly later than men. For cancer and diabetes, it's an average of 4 years later than men. And then for female-specific conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, you can wait 8 to 12 years for a diagnosis. That's a really long time for your symptoms to be unmanaged, and for your health condition to be deteriorating. So in this grim historical context is what inspired me to create Daye. And the reason why the company is called Daye is because we want to bring forward a new Daye in gynecological health innovation and gynecological health research. And along the way, we've faced so many challenges, predominantly related to the lack of funding in gynecological health. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but less than 2% of public funding that goes to healthcare goes to the entirety of women's health. Less than 1% of private funding and venture capital that goes to healthcare goes to the entirety of women's health. And as a result, this emerging femtech sector that's really exciting, the majority of femtech innovation today is being created in conditions of extreme scarcity. And I see that with all of my female founder friends. They can barely keep their companies afloat. They can barely afford to pay their team, let alone invest in research, clinical trials, and just the initiatives that are necessary for us to overcome this huge gender healthcare gap. So that's the context of why I created Daye, and what we're doing is creating a virtual platform for gynecological health management that's centered around repurposing the menstrual tampon, so it can serve for more than just soaking up menstrual fluid. So we started with the invention of the world's first pain-relieving tampon, designed to support chronic pelvic pain, dysmenorrhea. And then we introduced a diagnostic tampon, which enables at-home vaginal microbiome screening, STI screening, and the next key product development for us is to enable HPV, human papillomavirus screening with a less invasive tampon as well. So this was
what you're doing.
Thank you. This was the short introduction to the work that Kimberly is doing and the work that I'm doing. We're really proud to be one of Life and Lemons' partners. And if you work with, if you choose Daye's diagnostic tampon, you can then discuss your results and obtain aftercare, including acupuncture through Life and Lemons. But I wanted to turn the attention now to acupuncture and fertility and holistic methods for fertility management. So, Kimberly, I have a few questions prepared for you. Could you tell us a bit more about how you came across acupuncture as a tool to enable holistic wellness, and particularly in the context of providing fertility support? What is some of the data behind acupuncture, and what is the mechanism of action when it comes to supporting wellness and supporting fertility outcomes?
Mm-hmm. They are huge questions. So acupuncture has its benefits are so far stretched because it's a homeostatic tool at the end of the day. What we're not doing is forcing your body to do anything, but what we are doing is allowing your body to heal itself. And so what they found in lots of clinical research is how significant that healing capacity is, therefore, on women's health, hormonal health, and everything that feeds into fertile potential. So what we definitely don't do, we can't get women pregnant, and we really stipulate that at the very beginning of our treatment plan. But what we can do is work with that fertile potential. As I said, all of those things that feed into that bigger picture of health when it comes to fertile potential. So some of the ways that is, so we work with your central nervous system, and that's dialing down that sympathetic dominance that a lot of people are in, and supporting that parasympathetic state of being. So that's your rest and repair versus your that stress response in the body as well. And when we're in a state of rest and repair, actually what happens is everything works so much better. But when it comes to specifically fertility, if we look at those parasympathetic activities in the body, what we're looking at is a strong and effective ovulation, hormonal balance, balanced blood sugars. All of these things are actually based on that sympathetic nervous system being as balanced as possible. So when they say things like, you're as frustrating as this is when people say, oh, you're just stressed, that's the reason why you're not getting pregnant. To a degree, that's obviously definitely not true, but to another degree it is. So because what we're looking at when it comes to acupuncture is significant that stress is within one person's body. And that doesn't have to be external stress around you. It doesn't have to be your perceived stress, but it can be those internal stresses. So when we're looking at things like studies on this, what we can actually see is how acupuncture can work with immune modulation. So changing the way that the body is, that body's fight and flight and all your cellular activities and your white blood cells and your neutrophils can actually start changing and adapting, and all of that is really significant when it comes to fertility. And what we can also do is look at that clinical research and see how significant it is at dialing down inflammation. So there's lots of studies out there around that, and that's what I mean when it's not just around fertility per se, but it's the mechanisms that play into it, because immune health is so significant when it comes to that. And when we're looking at specifically acupuncture and fertility research, there's lots of studies around its benefit when it comes to IVF. So a lot of women come to me and they'll say that they've heard and they've read about this protocol that is it's quite an old protocol now, but it's basically supporting women throughout IVF, and it's a pre-transfer, post-transfer treatment. And this is it was a really interesting study, and it's kind of been picked to pieces now, but the efficacy around it is still there. The understanding and the mechanisms behind it is still there. So really what they're looking at here, so I've got this in front of me just because I always forget statistics. My brain isn't as numerical as yours, Valentine. But what they can see when it comes to things like acupuncture in IVF is that they're actually looking at how it can support your endometrial condition, it can regulate serum hormone levels, and it can improve pregnancy rates. And this was specifically with women with polycystic ovary syndrome. And what they've also noticed is in similar studies is how in particular in women over 35, that there's significant differences found with pregnancy rates when people were receiving acupuncture as well. So that was a 48.9% versus 23.7% with embryo implantation rates, and live birth rates were 34% versus 19.7%. So really, really significant results when it comes to that. And really, as I said, what we're looking at there, the mechanisms that play there, as I mentioned before, it's about your immune system, it's about your central nervous system. So coming out of that state of sympathetic dominance. You'll hear a lot about blood flow as well. So blood flow is really, really great at stimulating lots of blood to the uterus, supporting things like endometrial growth. What we're really, really laser focused at doing is working with that internal inflammation, that stress response in the body that can often trigger that inflammatory response in little pockets of place as well. So I work with patients on trying to identify those areas of inflammation and their hidden inflammatory response. So often what we're looking at is these functional parameters. And it's the same when it comes to microbiome testing as well. A lot of it falls outside of those really clinical parameters.
Sorry, someone I think accidentally unmuted, but I've muted them.
So we're looking at these functional parameters essentially, and lots of this hidden inflammation isn't necessarily going to come up in all of those clinical tests where you go to the GP and you get your FSH, LH, and estrogen measured when it comes to fertility testing. But what we're looking at are things like gut health and how that has an impact on that internal inflammation and that stress response. We're looking at your nervous system again. Is that triggering an inflammatory response? Your immune system, is that triggering an inflammatory response? And things like dental as well is again really significant when we're looking at those little pockets of inflammation. And so most of the time, that's really what we're doing, is working with dialing all of those things down so your body has the capacity to come back into a state of health and healing.
Thank you. Isn't that fascinating how our bodies are just so clever and they can pick up on any signs of stress, and any signs that they might interpret as, okay, now it's not the best time to have a baby. Let's stop the fertility function until you get your house in order, and then, we can kickstart it again. And it's amazing that, we have this balance going up and down.
Yeah.
And it's so incredible that we can use holistic tools like acupuncture to amend our current state of stress and cortisol response, and obviously our fertility as well.
Yeah. That's one of the biggest areas that we start to see some really clinically significant results, is when we dial down that stress, we tangibly see how things start changing, in particular with women with irregular cycles and ovulation. So when they're just not ovulating regularly. If we start to dial down that stress response, we start to see this really, really regular cycle. And that regularity is different from person to person. For some people, obviously, it's a little less, and for some people, it's a little more. It's definitely not always fitting in that neat little 28-day box. But it's amazing how working with that internal stress response, however it is affecting you and wherever it's pocketing, how impactful that can be on your cycle as well. And it's so nice to see when it all kind of comes back into balance.
Yeah, this point that you're making about the 28-day cycle, it's such a myth. There's data from the period tracking app Clue that shows that less than 20% of people actually fall within that 28-day cycle that is widely advertised as being the normal cycle. And what's actually considered normal is anywhere between 24 and 38 days, which is a significantly bigger window. But when we propagate the myth that the 28-day cycle is a norm, a lot of people might start thinking that their cycle length is actually abnormal, when there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Exactly. And it causes so much anxiety with people. And when you come to fertility anyway, there's so much anxiety associated with it. This misconception and these messages out there just fuel that anxiety. And it's so it's troublesome, because that in itself has this kind of vicious circle effect on how people are feeling during that particular time. Yeah.
Can increase your stress levels and your cortisol levels as well. Apart from acupuncture, could you tell us a bit more about what are some of the other holistic wellness rituals that we should really think about or consider implementing when preparing for the start of our fertility journey?
Yeah, so what I always do, and what I always work with patients, or try and educate them in that initial treatment consultation, is what we're trying to do is work with that fertile soil of the body. And what that means is essentially working with your cellular health, making sure that all your cells are as optimal and working as efficiently as they possibly can be. That starts really with nutrition. And I'm lucky enough to work with a nutritional therapist. She's absolutely amazing. And so we work together on a lot of these cases, because if you start laying that groundwork and that foundation first and foremost, it's going to make acupuncture work a lot better. It's going to make the treatment outcomes much more efficient. And we start to see this in our clinical statistics as well, how that combination of treatments can actually be really, really life-changing. And in particular, obviously, when it comes to fertility, completely and utterly life-changing. So that's our groundwork. That's our foundation that works with our fertile soil. And specifically, obviously, I'm not a nutritional therapist, but we do have these kind of crossovers. I am working with the basics, essentially, when it comes to that fertile soil, because sometimes some people only need to make tiny tweaks in order to have these really significant and profound effects on their body. So, for example, I work predominantly, and I tell my patients that hydration is absolutely key. So you'd be amazed by how many people don't drink water, full stop. And that doesn't mean fizzy drinks. It doesn't mean cordial. It doesn't mean teas or coffees. We're talking about plain and straight water. So we're working with that 2 liters. And one of the things that also I try and dispel myths around is the myth around things like salt and good fats, because actually salt helps with the hydration of our cells. And it makes everything work a lot more effectively too. So you'll notice that even if you, and I'm not talking about table salt, I'm talking about mineral-rich and mineral-dense salt, but that can be really beneficial in regards to how we feel and how our cells are operating. It's really, hydration, from my perspective, is the foundation of all health. And without that, we're really not going to start seeing the tangible benefits that we're looking for when it comes to optimizing fertile potential.
I love what you're saying about salt. If I'm ever feeling a bit poorly, I just have a bit of salt in a glass of water and it makes me feel so much better automatically.
It's
And what
amazing,
you're,
isn't it?
yeah, it's just like, and for me at least, it has an immediate impact. But I think what you're saying is also so important because we live in a time now where there's so many electrolyte supplements that are being advertised. And we're always told to, you know, have more electrolytes. But what are electrolytes? They're salts. So instead of paying for, you know, a very expensive electrolyte supplement, which actually also frequently contains sugar or other artificial sweeteners, you know, you can just have a glass of lemon and salt, and that's a perfectly good electrolyte.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really doesn't have to be complex. And I think that's one of the biggest things when it comes to fertility, is that it's so easy to get so overwhelmed with advice. You know, it's all on social media about what you should or shouldn't be doing. It's like you eat blueberries on day 4 and then you eat pineapples on day 15. It really doesn't have to be that complex. If you work with the foundation of health and work with your cellular health, from my perspective, that's as good as you can possibly do. Hydration is the key. What I try and also dispel this myth around is fats. So I often see women that come into clinic classified as a higher BMI from a medical perspective, and then they're told to lose weight because if they lose weight, their doctors told them that they will get pregnant and it's their weight that's affecting them. And then we start seeing that they go on these low-fat diets. And there's this myth around how fats can be a disservice to our health, when in actual fact, fats, good fats, not trans fats, but good fats, things like avocados, nuts and seeds, they are the basis of cholesterol, and cholesterol is the basis of all hormones in the body. So without fats, our hormones are inevitably going to be completely in disarray. So I try and encourage and educate my patients also around good fats. That's another way that we work. And to reduce those inflammatory foods as well, as I mentioned, things like trans fats, refined sugars, gluten in particular, obviously, because if there are these pockets of stress and we want to get that person back into a state of health and healing, we need to dial down those inflammatory mechanisms that we can control. And so that's how we work with our patients, controlling the controllables, essentially, because in fertility in particular, people feel completely out of control.
Yeah, and it's so great what you're sharing about healthy fats, because we still live in a culture that's posed a big ban on fats, and a lot of people still believe that eating fats will increase your BMI or it will increase your weight, when in fact it's the opposite. It helps fuel your body, it helps fuel your brain. It's so important in the production of the right female hormones. It's important for, when you're trying to increase the performance of your workouts as well. So there is nothing really that scary about salt and fats, despite what we were told by the FDA in the 1990s. It's really good that we're updating the nutritional guidelines that people are following, especially when it comes to fertility.
Absolutely.
Kim, would you mind sharing where you can, and without sharing any specific names, but could you please tell us a bit more about the success stories of some of the patients in your clinic? How has your work helped them in their fertility treatments and their fertility journey?
So so this year we've just pulled my amazing clinic manager, she just pulled all together all our clinic stats yesterday for last year. So we do that every year just to see where we're at from a treatment perspective and an outcomes perspective. And so I'll dive into specific cases in just a minute, but for reference, I saw last year just over 200 patients in clinic over a period of time, and our success for conception was 56%, which when in comparison to something like IVF actually stacks up really, really well. And that was in combination and natural conception and IVF too. And that's when they followed a very specific treatment plan. So that was that combination of treatment plans that we spoke about with acupuncture and working with that foundation of nutrition. We were seeing patients, or I was seeing patients during that time once a week, because we work with the life cycle of your growth, the follicles, once a week for 12 to 16 weeks, because your follicles grow around about 120 days. So they come into full growth around that time. And what we're looking to do is immerse that the quality of your follicles during that genesis period. So that's why we work in that particular way. And as a consequence, we start to see these really amazing clinical statistics as well. And on average, these patients had already been trying to conceive for 2 years. So they'd already started on that, all those fertility investigations too. And all these patients were coming for a variety of reasons. So things like PCOS, endometriosis, thyroid conditions, and mostly unexplained infertility and recurrent miscarriage. So that's kind of where we sit from a clinic stats perspective. But what we're finding is that we are seeing more and more complex cases. So now we're starting to see many more reproductive immunology cases. And these are people with existing known or unknown immunological conditions that are actually really impacting their fertility. But as I mentioned before, there's lots of research around how acupuncture can be an amazing immune modulator, and in particular in combination with nutritional therapy, it can be a game changer in that respect. But it takes a little time because these are chronic conditions. So we start to we can't make really significant headway when the body is so ingrained in a particular chronic state of dis-ease, essentially. So that's as a general, but some of our specific cases are relating to those areas of pockets of hidden inflammation that I mentioned before. So I had one patient have recurrent miscarriage and really severe endometriosis, and she'd had 2 laparoscopies already. And what we were able to do is support her through IVF, and she got pregnant on her 2nd round of IVF.
That's pretty good. On average, I think statistics from Merck shows that people have to go through over 3 IVF cycles before they're successful. So that's an excellent result.
Yeah, exactly. It was really, really good. And what we started to see and how we knew that it was having a tangible effect is because from an endometriosis perspective, her symptoms were so well managed at that particular point that we knew that her cycles had then become very regular. Her flow was much cleaner. If you've got endo or anything along those lines, then you'll know that sometimes your period doesn't feel that clean. And so that particular patient, her periods came much cleaner. And so she started to feel much more confident in embarking on her fertility treatment. So it wasn't that we could get her pregnant. Obviously, as I said, we can't do that. But what we could do in that instance is make sure that, firstly, she felt confident in her fertility treatment moving forwards and felt confident in her body, but also that we could dial down those symptoms so that she was of her healthiest version of herself as well. And then she knew that as well, when it came to things like pregnancy, that she wasn't too worried about her hormones being all over the place, because everything had been really well managed in that preconception phase. And then I worked with another patient this past year who had chronic back pain. And again, she'd had one miscarriage. And this chronic back pain, it was an old injury that had never really healed. And I say injury, it was really significant. I think it was a skiing accident. And she was in this chronic pain, albeit it was a pain. If you lived with chronic pain, you'll know that it becomes a management thing for a lot of people, and you end up just living with it and learning to live with it. And so that was the case for her. And she was finding that, again, her cycles were a little irregular, and our cycles have this beautiful capacity to be able to reflect if there is something a little miss from a health perspective, which is great. Some people refer it to as the fifth vital sign. So it's our next step and next reflection of how well we actually are. And so when we start seeing those greater regularities with our periods and our hormones, we start to know that things are back on track, more so from a fertility perspective as well, that your body is in a state to be able to therefore then go on and conceive. And that was the case for her too. And she was no longer in any pain, and because she was really worried about being in pain throughout pregnancy as well. And she wasn't in pain throughout pregnancy either. So whilst again, that wasn't a specific fertility targeted treatment, it was very much a working with the area of inflammation that was a struggle for her, dialing that down, and then everything else fell into place. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, and I try and tell my patients that come in to see me as well. It's not always about fertility. It's often about those areas and pockets of health that feed into that, and how can we make those work a little bit better and become in greater balance, because that in itself is going to have this amazing knock-on effect on your fertile potential as well. I had a patient, this was a little while ago, but it was really significant, a beautiful case, where she had PCOS, she wasn't ovulating, she was having a period every 3 months. She tried Clomid, letrozole, so all of those ovulation induction medications, with no effect from a cycle regulation perspective. It was throwing things out even more, and she was spotting mid-cycle. But what we were able to do with acupuncture was help regulate those cycles. So she started seeing really, again, not regular by the 28-day standard, but regular for her. And it was around about 34, 35 days from memory. And she started to see really good changes in cervical mucus as well. And she then went on to conceive naturally. And she also had a history of recurrent miscarriage. So again, that was a really, really beautiful case. But all of those cases, the back pain case was different, but the endometriosis case and that particular PCOS case, they all took a while. Those patients were seeing me for a period of time, and they were also making significant changes from a diet lifestyle perspective. So it's not something that just happens. It's definitely something that we work with patients on doing so that it's not stressful, but something that's very manageable and very sustainable, as we're all about making sure that they feel healthy and can sustain that level of health as well.
That's amazing. These stories are incredible, and what incredible results as well. And it's so positive for people to know that, if they are struggling with fertility, they can make these changes and access the support that they need through services like yours. It's really super exciting.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more? So how do you see the future of fertility management? What do you think are some of the ways in which we will manage our fertility in the future?
I think it's a really exciting area of medicine, because I think a lot of money is being put into it currently. So I think we're going to see more and more research and more shifts and changes in the way that we approach things, be it medically and holistically. And so I think it's an exciting place to be currently. And there is a greater receptivity of consultants in this particular area of medicine to work with holistic practitioners as well, so complementary therapists. It's often integrated into IVF clinics too. So that's also really exciting that there's this understanding that it's not one or the other, it's this combination, and that works really beautifully. There does, however, need to be a shift and a change. And one of my biggest bugbears in this particular area is that all the focus is currently on women. And so much of the time when you go through fertility investigations, women are being poked and prodded with an inch of their lives, and men are being told to leave the clinic and told that they have super sperm after one single sperm sample. And then even with unexplained infertility by classification, again, it always seems to fall onto the woman's shoulders in regards to how it's therefore treated and managed. It's the only area of medicine where women are currently treated for male factor issues as well. And so I feel like there is already, as a result of my mentor, Ian Stones, and his amazing team that have developed something called Test Him, there is already this growing awareness around male factor issues and how we can better support men and how we can have adequate diagnostics and also support, build a greater understanding and, sorry, build a greater understanding around how their role is impacting fertility, because there is so much research out there that indicates that they are 50% of the problem. And that's what I try and tell my patients when they come in, is that there is, we can do all the work with you all day long, but what we can't do is work with that other, what we can do, but what we aren't doing in that instance is working with that other 50% of the equation. And so I think there is going to be, because there has to be, if we're wanting to start seeing better results and better clinical statistics, there has to be a shift towards better understanding male factor infertility as well.
So great to hear. We carry such a huge burden when it comes to contraception, when it comes to fertility, and it's always so frustrating to see these stories of women undergoing extensive examinations before their partner has even had the simple semen test. So yeah, I fully agree with you. I hope that this is the future of fertility, a more two-sided, responsible approach.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be. Sorry, just to stop from barking.
Oh, is that a dachshund? No, is that a?
No, she's a spaniel.
Oh, she's so cute. She just had a haircut. Hi. Oh,
Yeah, she's
adorable.
called Judith there. And she's
Adorable.
really annoying, so that's why she's here. So
No, she's not. She's the best.
So yeah, so I think it's a really exciting area. But also, as I said, I think there's a greater shift in fertility medicine where we're actually starting to look at these functional areas of health. So it's not just these clinical things, but these functional parameters, actually what's going on there. As you'll know with the microbiome testing, that's not something that was necessarily always considered from a fertility perspective, but now is being much more widely adopted when it comes to fertility investigations. So I think it's going to be really interesting and exciting area.
Yeah, now we finally understand now that the vaginal microbiome plays such an important role in miscarriage, in preterm labor, in how likely you are to have a successful IVF outcome. And thanks to the changes to quantitative PCR testing that took place during COVID, we're now in a much easier position, and it's so much more affordable to do vaginal microbiome screening. It's more widely available. It used to be completely cost prohibitive. but now we're in a position where, you know, anyone that's undertaking an IVF cycle can also screen their vaginal microbiome to ensure that there isn't an underlying pathogen that will make their fertility journey more complicated. And that's something that we feel really passionately about at Daye, and it's why we offer our vaginal microbiome screen.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And the fact that it's not invasive like many of the other previous tests had been in a clinical setting, I think allows it to be so so easily integrated for so many women. So I think it's an amazing product.
Yeah, you do it at home. You don't have to go to a clinic, and then if you do go to a clinic, you can use the time in a clinic to actually discuss your results and you know, make the most of your time there. I'll just drop a link to it in the chat. Kim, one final question for me, which is, how soon do you think we should start preparing for our fertility journey? How soon should we check in on our fertility? When is the time to start preparing for you know, a successful fertility outcome?
So we always say that, again, at the life cycle of your eggs at a minimum. So what we're looking at doing is around about that 120-day mark. So that's going to be very different for different patients. So for example, if you're not ovulating, then it might take a little longer, because what we need to do is work with reestablishing ovulation prior to working with the quality and growth of those follicles. And so the earlier the better is really the principle. And the earlier the better, in particular when it comes to chronic health issues, in particular those immunological issues or incredible inflammatory issues, things like endometriosis. So really, as I said, at a minimum, we're looking at a 3 to 4 month period as a preconception care, as that's when we start to see those really significant tangible outcomes. As I said, from our recent clinical statistics, which has pretty much been the same from 2021 when we first started looking at this, it's around about, we start seeing positive conception both from IVF and natural conception around about that 11-12 treatment mark, which would be 11 or 12 weeks. But that can be a little more for people with chronic health problems. So as I said, at a minimum, it's usually around 12 to 16 weeks. That's
great. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing all of your incredible knowledge and phenomenal insights. It's been so great to be on this conversation with you today. For the rest of the time that we have, does anyone have any questions that you would like to ask? We have about 5 more minutes, so please do let us know. Feel free to raise your hand, switch on video if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, you can also just pop a question in the chat. Okay. If we have no immediate questions, please do feel free to follow Life and Lemons as well as Daye on social media. You can follow up with questions there. I'm just adding Life and Lemons' website here so that you can reach out and follow them and follow their work. This is their Instagram account as well. And you can find Daye at Your Daye on all platforms. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight. It's been great to have this conversation with you, and I'm glad that we spent some time talking about fertility, holistic well-being, the future of gynecological health, the future of fertility. And thanks again, Kim, for all of your insights and for so generously sharing your knowledge with us. No, thank you. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and I hope you join one of our next events soon. Perfect. Absolutely. Have a lovely evening. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.